Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I'm going to show you how to overclock a CPU. For all of today's testing I'm going to be using my Ryzen 5 1400 and it is water cooled. I'll leave a link down below where I do a setup tour where you can see how my old PC looks and with my water cooling setup and all of that. Alright, so first off I would suggest that you update your Windows to the latest version. Any updates there is, just do your updates, get Windows up to date. That'll really help just with all the stability and drivers and all of that. The next thing is I would actually recommend unplugging your Ethernet cable or your Wi-Fi dongle just to make sure that your computer will not connect to the internet, and do some random updates while you're doing your overclocking. Getting updates while you're overclocking might be irritating, but it could also be really bad for you, especially when you've done overclock that your system can't handle and then it wants to update Windows for some reason, and then you get stuck into a boot loop, and yeah, then you have to reload Windows. That really sucks, believe me, I've been there. Then the second thing is I would suggest getting something like Msi Afterburner or maybe a hardware monitor, just so you can see the temperatures of your CPU and as well as the speed of your CPU. Now I'll be showing you another trick where you can see the speed of your CPU. And then the third thing is I would recommend downloading a benchmark. Now the benchmark I'm going to be using today, and it is free, Cinebench R20. Now you can also use R23 if you want to. It just puts it in a loop for 10 minutes, or you can even use R15. But for today's testing, I'm going to be using R20. So if you want to maybe benchmark your CPU and compare it to mine, you're welcome to do that. Okay, the last thing I want to mention is before you overclock your CPU, go in and check your temperatures under load. So run a few benchmarks and then see what the temperatures are. So I'm going to switch my camera now, and so you can see the screen, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so right here you can see this is actually Task Manager. So how you open it, you just press Control Shift Escape, then you'll get this window actually right here. Then all you need to do is here at the top you just come to Performance. Oh, maybe if it'll be in this view, then all you have to do is click on More Details, then you'll get this screen right here. So just go to Performance, and right here you can actually see all the information that you need, or almost all of the information. Right, so the first thing up here is your CPU. So you can see there is my CPU name. So it's AMD Ryzen 5 1400 quad-core processor, and down here you can see some other information. So the current speed is 2.93 gigahertz, and the CPU's base speed is 3.2 gigahertz, and it has 4 cores and 8 threads. Right, so hyperthreading is enabled on the CPU. One thing I also have to mention is you can if you don't know if you can overclock your CPU, you can just open up Task Manager, come here and just copy this name right here and Google it and just see if your processor is overclockable. I know for most Ryzen CPUs, I think all of them actually are overclockable, but then for Intel the case is not the same. There's only a certain selection of CPUs from Intel that you can overclock. So just you can copy this name into just Google search and see if your CPU is overclockable. The important part here is to see the clock speed. So right here you can see our CPU is currently the base speed is 3.2 gigahertz. Alright, and then I also have MSI Afterburner open right here. You might recognize this from previous video I did where I overclocked a GPU. So as you can see, that settings are in here, and these are stable, so I'm not going to be worrying too much about my GPU. But as you can see down here, I have a tab right here, so CPU temperature. So as you can see, I'm currently idling at 21 degrees Celsius, so that is perfectly good. Yeah, there was a little spike right there. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to run basically a benchmark. So as you can see, is Cinebench R20. So I'm going to run it, and while this is running I can just bring up Msi Afterburner again so I can see the temperatures. Right, so there you can see I spiked up to 34. There the benchmark is running, and right here now you can see your CPU temperature. Now you can also use hardware monitor. Hardware monitor is it shows you everything on one screen, and that also it tells you the CPU voltage and what the clock speed is and the temperatures and everything. but Msi Afterburner is just a little bit more convenient for me. Alright, so I'm going to let this benchmark run, and once this is done, I'll be right back. Alright, as you can see here, the benchmark has just finished, and right here I got a score of 1,479. Alright, and right here you can see on the leaderboard, now there's a few other CPUs that have been tested here, so you can kind of compare it to see where you land. And over here you can see this is Msi Afterburner, and the temperatures were 34. It spiked up to 1 bit to 35, but that was all. So I'm quite comfortable overclocking the CPU, as under max load this is only reaching 34, and as you can see that is basically a flat line. And just to quickly see, the test is about 3 minutes long, maybe 4 minutes long for this one. Well, it depends on your CPU. Obviously, if you have a much better CPU, more powerful CPU, this benchmark will be much shorter. If you have a weaker CPU, then this will be much longer. Now you can run this multiple times, of course. Just once it's done, you can run it again. You can also, if you come up here to File and then to Preferences, you can actually right here input a amount of seconds. So you can run this for like 1,000 seconds or whatever, or just calculate. Maybe you want to run it for 10 minutes, then just times 60 times 10 and just put that number in here. So then you can run it for a little bit longer, for a certain period of time. Then it'll run over and over until the time is by and the benchmark is done. You can test it over a longer period of time. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to restart my computer. I'm going to go into the BIOS, and how I'm going to be doing that is I'm going to be just spamming delete. So all you do is you restart, and then as soon as it starts booting again, the computer, just say restart anyway. Alright, and then as soon as the computer starts rebooting, so there, it's off now. Alright, and there you'll hear the fans. Alright, it's starting to boot. So now I just hit delete on my keyboard. Might be able to hear it. And there you see that it was the BIOS screen, and right here I'm into the BIOS. Alright, now this will definitely look different, except if you have the exact same motherboard with me. But there is a few tabs here at the top. But the one we are interested in is the overclocking one. Now this might be underneath your advanced one. You just have to go and look around in your BIOS to see where your CPU overclocking is. Now by default this will be set to normal. This is just the OC Explore mode, but I'm going to set that to expert just so that I have a little bit more options. Alright, so right here you'll see this is the CPU frequency, and it's currently at 3.2. And right here it says CPU ratio, and if you click there, you can actually just set a number in there. So I can type in, let's say I want 3.4 and then 00, and then you just hit enter, and then you'll see it change. Now it won't always have this display here at the bottom saying what the frequency is, but if you change that and you hit enter, and you basically can click somewhere else, and that number stays the same, then you know it applied. Alright, game boost I'm actually going to leave off, because if you enable game boost, then it will ignore this CPU ratio. Let's go a bit down. I'm going to leave the FCH base clock at auto. Now right here we also have our DRAM, or just our computer RAM. We have the settings for that as well. So currently you can see this is running at 2666. Now I know my RAM is actually rated for 3000, so I'm just going to click there and change it right here to 3000. But down here there is no option for 3000. There's only one for 2933 or 3066. Now I'm going to put this on 3066 as I know this works. But what I definitely recommend is you change one setting at a time. So either you just bump up your CPU core ratio a little bit, or you change your DRAM. Now, definitely I would suggest that you first overclock your RAM if you want to do that. If you don't want to do that, you can just ignore this. But I would definitely check out what speed your RAM is. And now, normally on your RAM stick, there's a little sticker, and it will say what the speed of your RAM is. So you can just open your case up, maybe take one stick of RAM out, look on the sticker what it says, and then just come into the BIOS and check if it's running at the normal speed. Now by default this will normally be 2066. In very few cases it will automatically put it on the megahertz rating that your RAM is, but in almost all cases it will just default to 2066. So definitely recommend just checking it out and putting in the base value. Then you will literally get a little bit of performance right there, and it isn't even overclocking. And if we come a little bit down, you see, all right, here is the CPU voltage. Now again, I would take my CPU name and just Google it, like what is the just the max voltage. You can go on it, and on Google you'll find for your particular CPU there'll be a lot of forms stating what is the max voltage they recommend. At the moment this is on auto. Now I'm not going to leave this on auto because then it will fluctuate up and down a little too much. So I'm just going to put this in override mode. Alright, so right now I'm going to click here on auto, and then I'm going to put in 1.3 volts, and I'm just going to hit enter. So as you can see there, 1.3 volts, that's fine. It is a little bit higher than the current voltage, but remember this voltage is going to be under full load, then the CPU will need it. And the rest of the settings I'll just leave it as is. Alright, so after you've changed all your settings, then you want to come over to your, on my particular one, it's save and exit. Then you just say save, changes and reboot, and then you just say yes. And now your computer is going to restart. It's going to apply those settings, and then you just boot normally into Windows. Now if that failed, you just have to restart your computer and just go into the BIOS again by hitting delete on your keyboard. And then you can just change those settings back. And if you can't get into the BIOS, there's always the option of opening up your case, and then there's a little battery, like a coin battery on your motherboard, and the only thing you need to do there is you pop that out for like 20 seconds, then the system loses power completely. You put the little battery back in, and then that'll also reset your BIOS to the default settings. Okay, I'm just going to log into Windows right here, and then we will run the benchmark again to see if it's stable and to see if there's any performance. Alright, right here you can see I've opened my benchmark again. I have Task Manager right here again. I'm under the Performance tab once again, and if you come right down here you'll see the base speed is now 3.4. So with this we know now that our overclock was successful. It did apply correctly. And I also have Msi Afterburner open up here again. Let's just go to right here, CPU temperature. So you see right there it's idling about the same. So I'm going to run the benchmark again, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to be keeping an eye on the temperatures just to make sure that doesn't get too high, and then also we'll get a score to see if it improved. Alright, so let's run a benchmark and I'll be right back. Alright, the benchmark just finished right there, and you can see we now have 1,588 points. Alright, and as you can see right here in Msi Afterburner, the temperature spiked up to it was a 44 max, and then it leveled out at 48 degrees. Now that temperature spike or the jump from the previous 35 might seem a little bit high, but just remember I set the voltage for the CPU a little bit higher. That is still pretty fine here. But the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the BIOS, and I'm going to just continuing bumping up the megahertz of the CPU. So I'm going to try 3.6, and then maybe 3.65, 3.7. Basically, I'm going to continue with this until I get to a point where it crashes. And once it crashes, I'm just going to back a little bit, like let's say 0.25 gigahertz. I'm going to go down from whatever it crashed on, and then see if that's stable, and then I'll maybe try and bring down the voltage as well. So you basically have to just play around with this. This is definitely not just a 10-minute process. This definitely takes a few hours. It can even take up to maybe days or even weeks if you really want to like perfectly fine-tune your CPU. Right, so I'm going to restart again now. I'm going to go into the BIOS, and I'm just going to see what is the best we can do. So yeah, right here we have the score 1,588. I'm going to see how high I can go with this score, and as well as the same time keeping the temperatures as low as possible. Right, so I'll do that, and I'll be back in a second. I've played around with this now for a few different benchmarks, and I've come to a number that I'm really satisfied with, and that is at the moment, I can quickly show you right here. So at the moment I'm at 3.8 gigahertz, still at 1.3 volts on the CPU, and I am perfectly fine with that. And as you can see here in the temperature, or during this benchmark, it spiked to 44, but then it settled at around 43, 44, and I am perfectly happy with that. Now I am not going to push the CPU any further, although I think I might be able to get it further. The score right here, as you can see, is 1749. I might be able to get 1800. I'm not sure. I might be able to do it, but I'm not gonna overclock the CPU anymore. The next thing that I will do is actually run this benchmark in a loop for like 10, 20, maybe even 30 minutes, just to make sure that the CPU is absolutely stable at these overclock settings. Or what I can do is I can load up one of my games that I know is very demanding. Just a game that's very CPU intensive, maybe maybe Minecraft, like with a very high render distance, really just hitting the CPU really hard, just to see if it can handle that and if it's stable. So yeah, definitely before you just start using this, I would recommend just testing it more with different applications, different benchmarks, and in real world as well. So if you're someone that does like maybe some CAD doing and you need a lot of CPU power, go into like a project that you've already done and you just play around with it, see if the CPU performs as you expected it to. And yeah, once you have tested it for a few days, then and you know it's stable, then you can basically just leave those settings as is. Okay, let's talk about something else. You might notice that the temperature didn't climb really that much since the first benchmark. It climbed not even 10 degrees. The reason for this is what's causing the heat is not actually the speed of your CPU, so not what you overclock it to. I could maybe overclock the CPU to 3.9 gigahertz with the same voltage, and the temperatures will basically be around the same as this here. What causes the temperature to be higher is actually the voltage. So the lower you can get your voltage, the cooler your CPU will be, and also the more stable it will be at cooler temperatures. Not necessarily with lower voltages your CPU will be stable, but definitely with lower temperatures your CPU will be stable. And just for my own sake, I don't like my CPU being too hot, so yeah, I like it to be below 50 if I can help it, but I'll still be comfortable with it going up to around 60. Alright, so if you get to a point like where I am now, where you've settled on a clock speed that you're happy with, you can actually start going down with the voltage. So I am at 1.3 volts now, as I said. Maybe I can go down to like 1.295 or something like that, just a little bit lower, and step it down really like in small increments, and just get that point where it crashes again and just go like just one basically step back up again. So yeah, that's really for you to play around with and to find where your CPU is. Now this will definitely differ from CPUs. Even between two CPUs who are identical, the overclocks will matter because of just the silicon lottery. Alright, that is all from me for today. I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something. Maybe down below you can comment what CPU you have and what your Cinebench R20 score is. You've seen my score now, it's 1749. So leave down in the comments down below what your score is. Maybe you've got a bit higher or a bit lower. And then also rate what your overclocking is, like what the CPU base speed is, and then what you could get it to overclock to. I'll really be interested in what you guys can get. Right, that's all from me for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and you learned something. And I'll see you in the next video. But until then, bye bye.